Picture this, 1932, Australia. The Great Depression has hit hard. World War I veterans, now farmers, are struggling to make a living on the sun-baked plains of Western Australia. They've been given land, a promise of a new life. But as they plant their wheat, a new enemy emerges. An enemy they never saw coming. Not a foreign army, not a financial crash, but something far more feathery. This is the story of the Great Emu War. And no, I'm not making this up. So, these veteran farmers are out there, toiling under the scorching sun, dreaming of a decent harvest. But then, on the horizon, a dust cloud appears. It's not a storm. It's an army of 20,000 emus. Yes, you heard me right. 20,000 giant birds. These aren't your cute, fluffy zoo animals. These are 6 foot tall, feathered velociraptors with legs like tree trunks and a taste for wheat. They descended upon the farms like a biblical plague, trampling fences, devouring crops, and generally causing chaos. The farmers were desperate. They had fought for their country, and now they were losing a war against birds. So they did what any reasonable group of ex-soldiers would do. They went to the government for help. They sent a delegation, led by the veterans themselves, to the Minister of Defense, Sir George Pearce. Imagine that meeting. "Sir, we have a problem. It's emus." Now, you'd think the government would laugh them out of the room. But this was Australia. And Sir George Pearce, perhaps seeing a PR opportunity, or maybe just being a bit bored, actually agreed. He declared war. A literal, official war on the emus. The Australian military was deployed. This wasn't some half-baked militia. This was the Royal Australian Artillery. They sent in a real-deal military commander, Major G.P.W. Meredith, armed with 2 state-of-the-art Lewis machine guns and 10,000 rounds of ammunition. The media loved it. They sent a cinematographer along to capture the glorious victory. The stage was set for an epic showdown. Man versus beast. Machine gun versus bird. The first engagement took place in early November. Major Meredith and his men spotted a flock of about 50 emus. This was it. The moment of truth. The soldiers set up their Lewis gun, took aim, and opened fire. The plan was simple: mow them down. But the emus were tactical geniuses. The moment the gunfire erupted, the emus didn't panic and run in a straight line. Oh no. They broke into small, unpredictable groups and scattered in every direction. They zigzagged, they weaved, they ran with a baffling speed that made them impossible targets. The soldiers, used to stationary targets or charging enemies, were dumbfounded. They were trying to hit feathered phantoms. After firing hundreds of rounds, how many emus do you think they took down? 50, 30, 20. Try maybe a dozen. The rest just vanished back into the bush, probably laughing their beaks off. Major Meredith was stunned. He wrote in his report, "If we had a military division with the bullet-carrying capacity of these birds, It would face any army in the world. They can face machine guns with the invulnerability of tanks. He was basically saying these birds were built like armored vehicles. He was in awe of his enemy. But the army wasn't going to give up that easily. They decided to change tactics. Their next plan was an ambush. They found 1,000-strong flock of emus near a local dam. Perfect. The soldiers hid themselves, set up the guns, and waited. This time, they wouldn't miss. The emus ambled closer, completely unaware. The tension was thick. The cinematographer was ready. And then the gun jammed. Click. Silence. 1,000 emus looked up, probably blinked, and then casually wandered off while the soldiers frantically tried to fix their weapon. By the time they got it working again, the birds were gone. Not a single shot was fired in the great ambush. The official record for the day? 0 emu casualties. Human dignity casualties? Innumerable. At this point, things were getting embarrassing. The press, which had been so excited about the emu war, was now starting to mock the military. Headlines were brutal. The whole country was watching as their finest soldiers were being outsmarted by birds. Major Meredith, bless his heart, decided to mount one final, desperate attempt. He mounted a Lewis gun on the back of a truck. A mobile attack unit. What could possibly go wrong? They would chase the emus across the plains, machine gun blazing. It sounded like something out of a Mad Max movie. In reality, it was a comedy of errors. The truck bounced so violently on the rough terrain that the gunner couldn't aim to save his life. The emus, meanwhile, could outrun the truck. They were effortlessly gliding over the landscape while the soldiers were being thrown around in the back of a clattering vehicle, firing wildly into the Australian sky. At one point, an emu got tangled in a fence, and they thought, finally! They drove the truck right at it. But the bird freed itself at the last second, and the truck crashed straight through the fence, destroying it completely. The final tally after this glorious campaign? After almost a month of fighting, and using nearly 10,000 rounds of ammunition, the official military count was 986 emus killed. 986! Out of 20,000. That's a kill ratio of about 10 rounds per emu. And even that number is considered generous. Some reports say it was far less. Major Meredith and his men were recalled. The Great Emu War was over. The emus had won. The government, facing public ridicule, quietly withdrew its forces. The birds went back to eating wheat. The farmers were left to fix their fences. And the Australian military had suffered its most humiliating defeat. But the story doesn't end there. Here's the twist. The government, defeated but not completely useless, came up with a new plan. It was a less flashy, but far more effective strategy, a bounty system. They offered money for emu skins. The farmers, who knew the land and knew the birds, took matters into their own hands. Over the next 6 months, they claimed bounties on over 57,000 emus. It turned out the people best equipped to fight the emus were the farmers who lived alongside them, not soldiers with machine guns. The Great Emu War became a legendary tale in Australia, a story of hubris and absurdity. It is a perfect example of how the most powerful weapons are useless against an enemy you don't understand. The military planned for a war, but the emus were just living. They weren't an army, they were a force of nature. And what about Major Meredith? He went on to have a respectable military career, but he was forever known as the man who lost a war to birds. He maintained a deep, almost grudging respect for his feathered adversaries for the rest of his life. So the next time you see an emu, give it a nod of respect. You're looking at a descendant of the undefeated champions of the 1932 Great Emu War. They faced down machine guns and won. They proved that sometimes the most absurd problems require the simplest solutions, and that nature always finds a way. It's a hilarious, bizarre, and weirdly inspiring piece of history that Australia tries to laugh about, but probably never wants to repeat. Thanks for watching this wild ride through history. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more unbelievable true tales. And let me know in the comments what other crazy historical events you want to hear about. See you next time.